Last week, the U.S. House of Representatives narrowly passed the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, championed by U.S. President Donald Trump. It's a 1,000-page tax and spending document that includes some severe tax implications for Canadian companies and individuals, unless there are changes to the legislation. This could mean billions of dollars of extra taxes for Canadian companies and investors. Let's get more from Max Reed, a cross-border tax lawyer with Polaris Tax Counsel in Vancouver. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Can you just, before we get into this, are these tax measures, are they dependent on Canada not getting rid of things like the digital services tax and other tax measures America objects to? Can you just kick off with that?
So, right. So to start, the bill passed by the House includes a proposed code section 899 that will apply to countries, including Canada, that the United States deems have imposed, quote unquote, unfair tax regimes, right? So that includes the digital services tax and includes some of the Pillar 2 taxes that Canada currently has in place. So if Canada were to theoretically repeal the digital services tax and all the other objectionable taxes in the eyes of the U.S. government, then this would probably not apply to Canada.
And these so-called Pillar 2 measures, are they part of this global minimum tax effort?
Correct. Exactly.
If Canada doesn't repeal the digital services tax, and there's no indication that the current government wants to do that, tell us about the tax implications of this bill for Canadian companies first, please.
Right. So it's essentially an increase at 5% a year in the amount of U.S. tax that Canadian companies and individuals will pay. So let's take a very simple example. Let's say you're an individual and you invest in a stock of Apple. Okay? Apple pays you a dividend. Your current U.S. tax rate under that is 15%. If the legislation goes into effect and is targeted at Canada, over time that will increase to 20% in the first year, 25% in the third year, 30% in this, et cetera, all the way up to a maximum U.S. tax rate of 50%.
When you say 5%, you mean 5 percentage points in the rate?
5%, yeah. The tax rate increases at 5% a year, right? So it's going to go from 15 to 20 in year one, 20 to 25 in year two, 25 to 30 in year three, et cetera, all the way up to 50. The maximum.
Sorry, I cut you off there. What about the implications for individual investors? I mean, this sounds huge. So many Canadians own U.S. stocks.
Right. I mean, that's a huge implication for individual investors, right? Because all of a sudden, the amount of U.S. tax you're paying is going up a lot. And there's no guarantee that Canada will give you an offset against what you owe to Canada for the U.S. tax paid. So it could be a really significant net total tax increase for Canadians who invest in U.S. stocks that pay dividends or U.S. bonds.
And why would Canada not give you an offset? I couldn't quite understand that reason.
So the Canadian government's position is that they're only required to give you an offset for the tax that you've paid to the United States to the extent that the U.S. is allowed to impose that tax under the tax treaty. Okay? So the tax treaty currently permits the United States to impose a 15% tax on dividends. And so that's the amount that Canada feels that it's obliged to credit. So if the United States goes ahead and unilaterally increases that 15% tax on dividends to 25%, the position of the Canadian government appears to be that 10% differential, the increase from 15 to 25, doesn't require Canada to offset that against what you pay to Canada.
This is amazing stuff. What are the prospects of Canada actually backing down on the digital tax?
I mean, your guess is as good as mine. My sort of read of the political tea leaves is that now is not really the time where it's going to be politically popular to say, for the current government to remove a tax on Meta and Google and Netflix, which are not super popular companies in the current moment, in order to cave to the Trump administration. So I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's two sides to that. One is the sort of political pressures that the Carney government will face if it tries to do that. And the second is the digital service tax will presumably raise some money that the government would then have to find elsewhere. So your guess is as good as mine as to what the prospects of repeal of the digital services taxes actually is.
I mean, if this goes through, it's going to become a lot less attractive for individual investors to hold U.S. assets.
Yeah, exactly. Individual investors, the Canada pension plan, all of the big government pension plans, and then many Canadian businesses doing business in the United States. So the potential implications here are very wide-ranging.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, America, it would seem here, cutting off the supply of capital from abroad. In some ways, it would seem to be hurting themselves.
Yeah, I think in the long run, it will definitely hurt themselves, right? Sort of like the tariffs do, right? The logic, the implications of the tariffs are that domestic prices for consumers will go up. But I think with the taxes, the flight of capital from the United States will be more gradual. And so the implications will be more gradual than it would be with than it would have been with the tariffs, right? Because the taxes aren't. No one is going to panic sell all of their U.S. equities just because the dividend tax went up a little bit every year, right? Over time, it's a really significant implication, but I just don't think that people are going to panic sell their current investments. They're just going to adjust the way they make future investments.
Amazing. The scale of this, though, all right, the impact. Max, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure.
Max Reed, a cross-border tax lawyer with Polaris Tax Counsel in Vancouver.